Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Sonship Review Part 8, and this is Session 10. I wanted to wait until we were filming today to make a couple of announcements, just because I wanted to mark them on the recordings. But because of all the stuff that's been going on with the holidays and then the sickness and then the weather, it seems like it's been forever since we have met. And too long for me. It seems like a long time. So we're going to take just a moment at the start of this session and kind of refresh ourselves. Can you not hear me? Is that coming over the speakers at all? Okay. Something's not happening.
It's working.
It's working on the recording, but it's not working on... There it is. Okay. All right. Very good. Thanks, Norma, for letting us know about that. Okay, everybody can hear me? Anyway, so we'll do a little bit of a go back and kind of capture our thoughts about where we were so that we can all kind of pick up and be on the same page together. The other thing that I wanted to say right here at the start is that many of you know Tommy and Anita Bass. They've come and visited here before. They're up in Glen Rose. They've been friends of ours for 30 years. Tommy Bass passed away yesterday morning and was unexpected. So we don't know exactly what happened with that, but from everything that I understand so far, I think Tommy had a stroke and passed away. When I was talking to Anita yesterday, she said, we were just talking about this a couple of weeks ago, about, how we wanted things to be, and that kind of business. Tommy, they weren't sick or anything like that when they had that discussion, you just, when you get up my age or older, you start having those kinds of discussions a little more than normal. And so anyway, Anita asked if I would do the funeral, and I told her, of course, that I would. That funeral is going to be next Sunday at 2 o'clock. So, so we have a choice to make about what to do about that. We could either cancel next Sunday because I won't be here. We can have it on a different day. That doesn't matter to me at all. Or, does anybody else have a suggestion?
Mike.
Yeah, Linda?
Maybe we could have Mark fill in.
Maybe we could have Mark fill in.
Mark? Any comments?
He said, "You're not talking to me." Okay. Oh, brother. Anyway,
We got to start the year out right.
we have to start the year out right. Yeah. Well, I know that we've missed a lot, but this is it's important that this gets done, and so anyway, I'm gonna be there next Sunday. What do you really want to do? I kind of set that up with Linda just to give Mark a hard time. Do you want to just cancel next Sunday, or do you want to try to do this on a different day, or what do you want to do?
Just my opinion, but I think we should just probably cancel. I think it's going to be hard to get everybody together during the week.
Is that good for everybody? We'll just cancel next Sunday. Okay. Okay. Then we'll just do that. Okay. Yeah, but no wonder Bud's for it. He's working right. Okay. Then we'll just do that. Then if that works for everybody. There is a card that's been passed around. Do you know where it is? You don't have it? Oh, Billy, did you not give that card to Barbara to hand around? No? Yeah, you got 3 of them. Yeah. You know, I did. I think Anita is bearing up pretty well. Do you want to? Can you look in the car? Okay. Front seat. Look around where Billy sits. Anita, I think, is doing really well. She wants this to be a homegoing celebration. And you don't get to have those very often because funerals mean different things to different people. But she wants a clear presentation of the gospel, and she wants, somebody, she wants that to be clear. And there's going to be a lot of family members there, some of which are going to need to hear that. And so, we need to do something that will not only comfort the family, but will honor Tommy's memory and glorify the Lord all at the same time. And I think we can do that. And we'll be in the unique position. You know what? I've already gotten some phone calls from folks that said, they've come on board with Sonship not when we started, but after the fact. And now this is the first time somebody has actually passed away who's been involved in the Sonship education. And so, they had questions about, now, how does this work now? If someone doesn't go all the way through the education, and what's happening with that? I'm glad that that's the kind of thoughts that folks are having. They said, you kind of know all this in your head, but you don't really think about it until something happens that makes you, look at it differently. So, anyway, I hope that this will, in turn, cause all of us to, if you'll pick one out, and we'll just pass it around. And if everybody would just sign those, that'd be great. I know that'd be a real encouragement to Anita. Okay. All right, so we, I guess that's enough about that. Let's kind of take a look at, and look, here's the other thing I needed to talk about. Because I had all of this ready to go last week, I had it sitting out on the table to bring and to do this. It sat there on the table all week long. And so today I put it in my briefcase, but evidently the flash drive that I do the PowerPoint, I guess I moved it sometime during the week. And so I don't, you have the verses in your notes, but I don't have a flash drive presentation. So when we get to the part that the kids will be filling in their sheets, and they have those sheets back there today, then I'll just have to kind of help talk everybody through that. Okay. By the way, the notes that you have today, sorry, one more announcement. The notes that you have today, we didn't finish the notes that we handed out several Sundays back. But these get inserted into these notes. So you don't have these that I've given you today. Yeah, I mean, you didn't already have them. Remember when I gave you about 20 pages worth of notes a couple of Sundays back? Well, I say a couple of Sundays back when we were before the holidays. Well, you don't have these notes that are back on the table today. So if you don't have these, they're back on the back corner of the table. And they should start with session 10. And we'll be doing 10, 11, and 12 today. So these are not something that you already have. All right. I'll give everybody kind of a minute to catch up and get notes and make sure that everybody's kind of got something. And since I don't have a PowerPoint, it'd be really important for you to have those today, because that's where the verses are going to be. Who else? You don't have any?
No.
Okay. He looks like a railroad guy today. I'm sorry? He looks like what? Oh, okay. All right. Everybody, who still doesn't have notes? Norma? Anybody else? Everybody else got them? Okay. You got your Bible Safari? All right. The date is wrong because I thought we would be doing this last week. So the date is wrong, but you can scratch that and put today's date or just leave it like it is. We'll know what that is. Okay. You probably don't remember this, but back when we left off the last time, look, here's where we are. We are looking at the end of Romans chapter 9, verses 30 to 33. This is a new part. In other words, we were in the Sonship Review Part 7, and that was Romans chapter 9, verses 1 to 29. That was the Sonship Review Part 7. This is the Sonship Review Part 8. Because in verses 30 to 33, we are introduced to the issue of Israel's stumbling. That issue is going to continue in Romans chapter 10, and we're going to get the details of that in chapter 10. So what I did is I sectioned that off because remember what Paul's doing here is he is dealing with those objections to the message that he's been giving. There were 3 different objections. He answered each one of those. We went through those, and you have notes on that. But then when you get to to verse 30 in that chapter, he's moving away now from answering objections to God has set Israel aside and he's begun to work with Gentiles. He's not dealing with objections to that anymore. Now he's talking about Israel's stumbling and why they're in the condition that they're in. And now he's going to begin to deal with that. So we get introduced to that in Romans chapter 9, beginning in verse 30. When we were looking at that issue, when we were getting into that issue, we were looking at a parable over in Matthew chapter 21. Because back there, Jesus actually talks about this stumbling issue. I was trying to give us some background so that we would be able to understand all of that. So before we go back and look at that parable, I don't have the PowerPoint up. Let's just read, it's in your notes, let's just read starting in verse 30 of Romans chapter 9, and this will kind of refresh us as to where we are. So verse 30 starts out with this. What shall we say then? That the Gentiles, which followed not after righteousness, have attained to righteousness, even the righteousness which is of faith. But Israel, which followed after the law of righteousness, hath not attained to the law of righteousness. Wherefore? Because they sought it not by faith, but as it were by the works of the law. For they stumbled at that stumbling stone. As it is written, Behold, I lay in Zion a stumbling stone and rock of offense, and whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. Now, we're going to go back now, and we're going to pick up that parable in Matthew chapter 21. But to do that, I know you probably don't, you might remember this, but I actually gave you a 4-fold breakdown of the book of Matthew in either the next to last or the last sessions that we had before we stopped. Well, as we're doing that, let me just say that there's another division that I want to give you about that, and I think it's important for you to be able to understand this and kind of get this in your mind. Matthew chapter 21, where we find this parable, Matthew chapter 21 is in that third section of, and if all you have to do is go back and look at your notes, I detailed those 4 sections. It's in that 4th section of the book of Matthew. The main thing that was going on there is the Lord was, He was renouncing Israel's vain religious system. And actually He's making some pronouncements about that. In addition to that, there's some other things that were being done there. Let me give you a couple of them. The Lord was preparing the little flock, so He was renouncing the vain religious system. He was preparing the little flock for the persecutions and the tribulations that were going to come upon them, especially those tribulations from the religious leaders of the vain religious system. In other words, that counterfeit system that Israel had in place. Now, and they're going to benefit from those things that are being said to them, especially. Now look, yeah, there'd be some benefit during the earthly ministry of Jesus, but that was actually meant during the extension of mercy and out there during that 5th installment of the 5th course of punishment, or what we normally refer to as the tribulation period. The things that are being said to them back there in Matthew are actually, they're going to have real application to a future time for them, and they're going to need that because of the things that they're going to be encountering. Now, when I gave you that 4-fold breakdown, I gave you those 4 sections of the book of Matthew. In your notes, I said I may have gotten the cart before the horse a little bit, because there's actually a more general breakdown. I mean, not that I gave you anything wrong about those 4, but there's a more general breakdown that you actually need to know about, I think, before you see the 4-fold breakdown. And so I want to give that to you. And so to do that, let me set this up. Let me say some things to you so you'll understand why it's important to understand the breakdown in the book of Matthew. We know that we have been given the spirit of adoption, and we realize what that means. But I want to remind you that Israel also had an adoption. If you look at your notes, Matthew chapter 9 and verse 4, let me just remind you of this. Paul says, "Who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the service of God and the promises." So what I want to do here is I just want to pause for a moment and say, when you read that, something ought to be going through your mind. You ought to be thinking about that in a particular way. If someone says, that the adoption also pertains to Israel, actually it pertained to them before it pertained to us. But if the adoption pertained to Israel, what should you be thinking? What should be in your mind about that? Well, you should be thinking about what adoption is and what that means. And so if I were to just say, what is adoption in a nutshell, it would be that a father is looking at a son to bring into the father's business and to educate the son in the workings of that business. The wisdom and understanding of the father is going to be put in his son, so that his son can really and truly labor with his father. And there's a particular way in which that gets done. We call this the pattern for edification. And it makes sense. And it doesn't matter if you're an earthly father looking to bring your earthly son into the family business, or if it's your heavenly father looking to bring you into his business. This all happens the same way if it's happening properly and correctly. And the first thing is, this is affecting our thinking. In other words, before, God's not just going to give you a list of things to do and not do. He's going to teach you how to think about it the way He thinks about it. How to see it the way He sees it. So it means the same thing to you that it means to Him. And so that's the first thing about that adoption, that issue of adoption. And that ought to be in our mind not only about us, but also about Israel, because the adoption pertains to them as well. It is going to be different doctrine for them than it is for us, yes, because they're going to be doing something in an earthly kingdom here. We're going to be doing something in the heavenly places. Now, I know everybody here understands that issue. The second thing, though, is that renewed thinking, that new way of looking at things, that new way of understanding things and how you view things is now going to translate into making a difference in the way we live our daily lives. How we and I'm saying it that way, but look, let me add a component to this. And you know this already, I just want to remind you of it. It's not just it is the things that we're doing in our daily lives, but this has to do to a great extent with the decision making that we're going to make every day. In other words, what am I going to do about this, or how am I going to respond to that? I'm just trying to remind you of these things so that we have all this working. And then, of course, the last thing is once we begin to be practiced at this, and we become skilled at it, and we do it, and we do it, and we do it, until it kind of becomes a second nature to us. Now, what we're doing is we're being equipped to be able to put into a position in the Father's business and actually labor with the Father to the accomplishment of His will and the accomplishment of His purpose. And so all of those are some of the things that we have in mind, because, and I know I'm giving you a background to Matthew 21, because those are the three aspects that every son engages in, whether you're a member of the body of Christ or whether you're a member of the little flock, the believing remnant of Israel. The first thing God is going to do is change the way you think, and then change the way you live, and that's what equips us to be able to labor with Him. And He is doing that in the book of Matthew with the little flock. That's why I'm setting it up this way. I'm not just reviewing that because I think you don't know it. But what I'm about to do here is show you how the Lord is now going to begin instructing the little flock and preparing them as well. And so adoption is about these two things. It is about an education, because there are things that you need to know. And if you don't know them, then you know what? You can't benefit from them. The second thing, though, but it's not just information. It's not just about us gathering a bunch of facts up in our head, but now we have to actually begin to put those to work. And that is called edification. The root word of edification is edifice. An edifice is a building, and that's what edification is. It is the building up that we're going to be involved in here. Okay, so having said that, we realize that there's an adoption for us, there's an adoption for Israel, and with these decision-making skills, we're going to be schooled in, and so are they, in wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. Everything else that's taught to you is going to build. And where do we get our initial instruction for all of this? This is taught to us in the book of Romans. The initial instruction in it. Not every detail, but everything else that Paul is going to teach us in all the rest of his epistles is going to be built on something he has already introduced us to in Romans. There is nothing outside of Romans that he's going to be talking to us about. You see what I'm saying? In other words, there's 4 decision-making skills given to you in Romans, but when you get to Ephesians, he's not going to go, hey, here's number 5 and number 6. There is no 5 and 6. There's 4. And then everything that we learn in Romans about getting, and this is like the foundation getting poured, everything else is going to be built on top of that. Okay, now, having said that, let me give you this breakdown, and you'll see in a moment why all this was necessary to talk about. Let me give you this breakdown in the book of Matthew, and this is in the kids' note in their Bible Safari. And I don't know. I don't know what I did with your notes. I printed them too long ago. But here they are. Part 1 in the book of Matthew is chapters 1 through 12. That pretty much eliminates what part 2 is. It's going to be 13 to 28. And that is the twofold breakdown of the book of Matthew. Let me tell you what these are. In Matthew chapters 1 through 12, the Lord is preaching the acceptable year of the Lord. I'm going to show you this in the Scripture in just a moment. So, in fact, let's take a look at it. And in your notes, you have it. Isaiah chapter 61. It says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim," and this is the important part, "the acceptable year of the Lord." And then there's a comma, and you have an "and." So here's the second thing that he is declaring. To proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God. And then he's going to go on to continue to talk about that, to comfort all that mourn, and he's going to expound on that. All right, folks, this is more important than we think. But to really understand everything that's going on in the Scriptures, look, in the book of Matthew, in the first half of that book, not exact half, but the first 12 chapters, he is preaching the acceptable year of the Lord. I'm going to tell you what that means in just a moment. But in the second half, he's declaring the other part that Isaiah said he would do. He is talking about the day of vengeance of our God. Those are two separate issues. Now, that, and by the way, on the kids' note takers, that's what this is. This is part 1, part 2. All right, I'm sorry, this is going off. All right, let's stop right here just for a second. Let Mark reset that.